Age has been a big topic this election cycle. In one of his many books, The Virtues of Aging, Jimmy Carter wrote that people tend to vote according to their age group. In other words, 20% of 20-somethings vote, 30% of 30-somethings vote, 40% of 40-somethings vote, etc. This always made an impression on me, and if you follow it through, it would mean that 100% of 100-year-olds vote. I don't know if that's exactly true, but you get the idea. We all know that Jimmy Carter, who recently reached 100, is certainly going to vote. Welcome. Local political scientists Dr. Campbell and Dr. Coppage have told me that this voter phenomenon, which Carter wrote about in 1998, doesn't necessarily hold true today, 25 years later. Dr. Coppage noted that certain candidates will bring a higher turnout among younger voters, but the overall trend is reliable in that older voters do tend to vote in higher numbers than younger voters. I really believe that if 20-somethings voted like 80-somethings, there would be a revolution in this country. According to the Legal Defense Fund, 2020 saw the highest turnout of voters of color in American history, and Gen Z, voters aged 18 to 24, had a lot to do with this. While older voters still turned out in the largest numbers, Gen Z voters had the greatest turnout increase since 2016, demonstrating their potential to create massive change. So why vote? I mean, what's the point? I don't have any special credentials. I'm just your average, everyday, run-of-the-mill U.S. citizen, but I am passionate about voting. I believe it's our duty, it's our right. But I had to think long and hard about exactly why voting is important. In times like these, it can actually feel discouraging. So I'm here to tell you that your vote matters a lot. Your vote matters now more than ever. The Council on Foreign Relations reports that close presidential elections have become the norm. Voting connects us all, and with our vote, we honor those who have fought for voting rights and those that are still disenfranchised in our country and worldwide. We honor those who have fought and died for voting rights, a right many take for granted. Thinking about those who fought for voting rights caused me to reflect on the life of Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony was born in 1820 in Massachusetts to a Quaker family. But in her 20s, she started attending the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, New York. And at that time, she switched to wearing a short, knee-length skirt and bloomers, called the bloomer dress, which was considered quite scandalous at the time. Interestingly, Anthony never married or had children, but she would often babysit or supervise, as they called it at the time, the children of her bestie, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had 7 children, so that Elizabeth could write the speeches for Susan B. Anthony. It was said that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the writer and intellect of the suffrage movement, while Susan B. Anthony was the face of the movement, unmarried, childless, and free to travel around the country. In fact, Susan B. Anthony earned nearly all of her money on the lecture circuit, traveling across the country fighting for the right for women to vote. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony was arrested for voting in her hometown of Rochester in violation of laws that allowed only men to vote. She was tried and convicted, but never paid the $100 fine. And they didn't enforce it either. Susan B. Anthony died in 1906 and did not live to see the adoption of the 19th Amendment in 1920. The fact remains that women have only been allowed to vote for 104 years in the nearly 275-year history of this country. To quote Susan B. Anthony, "Someone struggled for your right to vote, use it." Susan B. Anthony was also an abolitionist and an acquaintance of Frederick Douglass, who famously said in 1865, "Slavery is not abolished until the black man has the ballot." Voting rights for African Americans has a long and complicated history, which involved 2 constitutional amendments, 2 Reconstruction Acts, 2 Civil Rights Acts, 3 Enforcement Acts, and the impeachment of a president. That would be Andrew Johnson. Yet even that was not enough to ensure that African American voices would be heard or that their lives would be protected. I'm skipping over a lot of history here, but it would take another service Sunday to really cover this in detail. I'm a U.S. history geek, so I love this stuff. Even today, legislation to ensure voting rights is pending in Congress. The first of the pending voting laws in Congress is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would restore sections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that the Supreme Court has struck down or weakened. The second is the Freedom to Vote Act, which would set a floor for voting access in federal elections, meaning states could enact more inclusive procedures, but not less inclusive ones. Among other things, the Freedom to Vote Act would expand automatic voter registration programs, let all voters register online and on election day, require at least 15 days of early voting, and restore voting rights to felons upon their release from prison. As Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. writes, in the very divisive political period in which we find ourselves, it is important to remember the critical importance of voting rights for all Americans. A single vote may seem like such a tiny thing, but all our votes together are so powerful. When I started to think about the impact of one vote, and does one vote really matter? And when I closed my eyes to meditate on this, the image I always got was a drop of water, like a raindrop. And if each of our votes was a raindrop, we could fill the St. Joseph River. We could fill Lake Michigan. We could fill the Pacific Ocean. And that is power, the power of democracy. I think of Unitarian Universalists as being progressive, and that's one of the reasons I attend this church. So I feel certain that most of you are going to vote. What I ask is that you make a plan to vote. Early voting has already begun at the county sitting building in St. Joseph County. I voted last Thursday afternoon. No lines, lots of staff, and it took me all of 10 minutes. I have a list of St. Joseph County precincts with me. Voting is no longer precinct specific. You can vote anywhere, even on your way home from work. I urge you to check in with those around you, your family, friends, and neighbors, and make sure they have a plan to vote. Encourage everyone you know to vote. Together, we can make a difference. Please see me if you need more information on the mechanics of voting, where and how to vote. I've had some training this past week as a poll worker for early voting. Chuck Leone, a member of the St. Joseph County Election Board, is also available after the service. So in closing, I'd like to show a short 3.5-minute video. Thank you.
This system doesn't work if people opt out. this system doesn't this system doesn't work if people opt out. And the easiest cure, the simplest cure for what ails our democracy is everybody voting. Now, it's true that there's some states that purposely make it hard for people to vote. We're the only major democracy in the world that actively makes it hard for people to vote. And so you should be, particularly as in your student newspapers, as you go back to your home states, you should be asking, why is it that we have laws that are purposely making it harder for people to vote, purposely making it harder for young people to vote? And there's a political agenda there. The people in power don't want things to change. They want cynicism. Because obviously the existing system, as frustrating as it is for everybody else, works for them. Well, if you want to upend that, we got to vote. But even in those states that purposely make it harder to vote, the truth of the matter is on your college campuses, half the folks, maybe 2/3 of the folks who don't vote because they're just not paying attention. Peace and refugees, you care that you're registered and make sure you actually vote. Well, if you care about climate, who don't vote because they're just not paying attention. They don't consider it important. And they're not willing to take the 15 minutes or half hour that it takes to make sure that you're registered and make sure you actually vote. Well, if you care about climate change, you care about college costs, you care about career opportunities, you care about war and peace and refugees, you can't just complain. You got to vote. And what's interesting is young people, as a voting bloc, are the least likely to vote. But when you do vote, have the biggest impact on elections. During a presidential year, young people account for like 19% of the total vote. During an off-year election, when folks aren't paying as much attention, they account for 12%. And that means that the kinds of candidates that get elected and the priorities that they reflect are entirely different, just based on whether or not you guys are going to the polls. So don't let people tell you that what you do doesn't matter. It does. Don't give away your power. That should be the main message that you deliver all the time. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, whether you're conservative on some issues, liberal on others. If you participate and you take the time to be informed about the issues and you actually turn out and your peers turn out, you change the country. You do. It may not always happen as fast as you'd like, but you'll change it. So I'll keep on talking about this even after I leave the presidency. This is, you got me started. I went on a rant, didn't I? All right. So I'm counting on you guys. Don't let me down. All right? Don't let the country down.
Thank you, Christina. And now it's time for the offering. We ask for your help in supporting this congregation financially and other ways to remain a light to this world. In the television screens on the sides,